Welcome. In this video, I'd just like to give you an introduction to Jasmine, which is a unit testing framework for JavaScript. So we're starting here on the Jasmine 2.0 introduction page. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll to the releases page and open that up. Now, there are actually newer releases, but I'm just going to grab version 2.0.2. And when I open that zip file, I can see I have lib or lib folder, license spec folder with a couple of an example spec and an example custom matcher for helping with specs. And then we've got the spec runner HTML page and a source folder that has a couple of different modules, basically song and player. So let's take a look at spec runner HTML first. And now spec runner HTML, we can see what it takes to basically get Jasmine up and running on an HTML page. And what's cool about Jasmine is that you can do it command line or you can do it just on any freestanding HTML page. So what it requires, Jasmine provides its own CSS to make things look pretty, but then you can see Jasmine.js, then for HTML reporting, Jasmine-HTML.js, and then finally boot.js. And boot.js is actually what exposes the Jasmine object. And then we can see the source files, player and song, and helpers for the testing, the spec helper there, and then an actual spec or a test suite. So let's just go ahead and see what a spec looks like to begin with here. Now, Jasmine is a BDD, or behavior-driven development style of naming. So you see this describe is just a way to sort of say, here's what I'm working with. This is the system under test. And everything inside of this describe is going to relate to that particular item or system under test. And you'll see you can also have nested describes. So that's really convenient for reporting and also keeping some before and after behavior. So this is not an extremely complicated spec, but enough to show you quite a few of the features of Jasmine. So again, we're using Jasmine 2 right here, and you can see that it's just vanilla JavaScript, but we have some special functions here. So again, the describe, and then the function inside of there is what's going to run when we actually execute the specs on the page. Before each is like setup in other testing frameworks. So before each means before each test that's inside of this describe block, do these actions. And then you could also add an after each. And that would also, if you wanted to say set player equal to null or something like that, that would allow you to do teardown, as it's called in other frameworks. So before each, set up a player and song, and then it. So going along with describing player, these read just, like specifications should in English. Describe player, it should be able to play a song. And then describe player, when song has been paused, it should indicate that the song is currently paused. So the nice thing about, one thing that I really like about Jasmine is just the readability of the specs when you do write them. And when you can write them out in such a way that they're readable, it's sometimes a lot easier to set up the tests to do what you actually intended to have the system do. Okay, so besides the describe before each and it that Jasmine provides, it also provides an expect. And that is a function that then you do sort of expectations or matches or assertions on. So the player should be able to play a song. We'd expect that player.currently playing song, which is just some property on the player object, to equal, and that's a Jasmine matcher, and then song. And song, of course, has already been set up in our before each. And so you'll see to equal. There's also like a to be. A to be is like triple equals in JavaScript. It's actually checking, for identity whether some things are referentially equal. To equal is more, do they have the same properties? So that's what you'll use most of the time when you do Jasmine matchers. And then another thing about Jasmine, you see expect player to be playing song. Now that doesn't seem like something that is universally useful, and it's not. It's something specific that the spec helper added. So let's take a look at that file. Now in spec helper, before each, again, we saw that before, that just sets up something before every test. And what it's doing is adding a matcher, a custom matcher like to equal or to be, and the name of that is to be playing. And you can just see that there's some compare function, and you can also have custom error text, and then it just does some comparison and returns true or false. So to be playing is a custom matcher that is applicable to this particular domain. Now there are a few other useful uh, um, expectations to know about Jasmine. One of them here is to be falsy, so you can check to be truthy or to be falsy. You can also just say to be and then put true or false if you wanted to check specifically for true or false. And then another one is this, expect something dot not, and that will negate any of the known matchers. So not to be playing, you saw that you set up the custom matcher to be playing, but you didn't set up a negation of that. That comes automatically for you. That's a great thing about Jasmine as well. Let's see what else. We've got to equal again. Now this to have been called with, that is an interesting one. So let's take a look at what is setting that up. Right here is another Jasmine thing, spy on. Now spy on creates a spy in the Jasmine terminology. That's also known as a mock or a test double more generally. And that can be either a stub or a true mock, or there's a lot of mixed terminology around what a mock or a spy is, but basically what it does is takes this song object that was created at the beginning, and there's a persist favorite status function, a method on that song object, and when we call player play song and player make favorite, we assume that this persist favorite status method of the song object is going to be called from either one or both of these functions. So when we spy on this, first it ensures that the song object has this actual method on it. If it doesn't, then we'll get an exception, which is great for checking interfaces and verifying that you are actually do actually have that method present. And then when we're actually doing an assertion on that, we expect this function song.persistFavoriteStatus to have been called with. You can also just do to have been called, and that will just check whether that method was actually called. But conveniently, we can also go a little more in depth and ensure that it was called with some arguments. And so this will match if it was called multiple times. This will match if any of the times it was called are true, or it was called with the argument being true. So that's something to be aware of if you set up multiple spies and call them multiple times. You might want to make sure that you're using the correct call and verifying that the correct call was called with particular arguments. But that could be addressed at some other video. And then finally, if you want to ensure that something is throwing exceptions, we, without wrapping it in the try-catch ourselves, we could just wrap it in an anonymous function. So we expect this anonymous function, which just calls player resume, to then throw. And in particular, this is throwing an error with the text song is already playing. So that's the error that we expect to be thrown. We could also say .not to throw error, and that would just, again, negate that and verify that an exception isn't thrown. So if that's all well and good, we can see that we have a describe and a couple nested describes and a few test cases, or its. And let's actually see this running and see what it looks like. So spec runner HTML, I'm just going to open that up in Chrome. And very quickly, in 0.007 seconds, we can see that there are 5 specs and none of them failed. Now this is the default specrunner.html and Jasmine CSS, and it looks pretty nice. What's also great is that you saw in the beginning we had describe player and describe when song has been paused, and you can see that it's indented. So let me switch back to the code. We've got describe player, and then it should be able to play a song, and you can see tabbed over here is that first spec, that first it. Then when we have a nested describe, it creates a nice heading, and then the its below it are indented as well. So this nested describe just makes it really nice and easy to read these specs in English and apply the same prefix text to all of these specs. So they're all describing the player. And now if I want to just run a particular test, say this one, you can see I have a hyperlink, and when I click it, it adds the URL argument spec equals and then the name of the spec. And it could just be part of a spec. It could just be player or player when song, for instance. And now you can see we're only running one of 5 specs. So if you want to debug a particular spec or just kind of only run a subset of the specs, this is one quick and easy way to do that with Jasmine in the HTML runner. The equivalent if you're running command line is the dash dash filter argument. So when all specs are passing, it's not that interesting. Let's go ahead and run all the specs again, and let's make it fail. So I'm going to switch back to, let's do, it should be able to play a song. We expect the currently playing song to equal song. So let's actually go and modify the code itself in player. And we want play to say currently playing song, so let's just comment out that line and save it. Now when we refresh the page, now we've got some failures. And so this is what it looks like when you've got a mix of passes and failures. You only see the failures highlighted here, and you can scroll through and see the stack trace. And using Jasmine matchers gives you this nice expectation syntax. So expected, and then what the first argument there was undefined, and then what it was expected to be equal to. And so that's a nice thing about using expect, to be true or to equal 3. If you have numbers, it will give you a nicer error message. And if we wanted to just see all the specs that we're passing as well, and get back to that view, we can go to spec list and kind of see, oh, this one's still passing, this one's still passing, these 3 are failing. Now, if you want to know why it's failing, if it's a complicated test and you haven't really been able to get all the setup easily done, and you kind of want to just see where it is and step through in the debugger on a particular test, so you just open up the console in Chrome here, and let's just navigate to player spec, and we can see that we have our spec here, and we want to say, oh, it should be able to play a song. And what exactly is happening here? Let's set a breakpoint and refresh the page. And now we've hit the spec, and let's just step through. So F11. Oh, okay. So this got commented out. That's why this is failing. Let's step through, step through. Yeah, this expectation, it runs through, so it'll do multiple expectations. It won't just quit on the first one. But then we keep running, and we can see that the first one is where it's starting to complain. And then we also see the second expectation is also showing up. So this expect undefined equal an empty object is this first expectation. So currently playing song is undefined is what it's saying. And the second one, it's expecting player, which is some object that is playing to true, to be playing this song. Again, that's that custom matcher. So if we open up the helper, spec helper, to be playing would actually check if this currently playing song property is equal to the expected and player is playing. Since currently playing song is undefined, this is not undefined, we're going to get a failure here as well. So that's the other thing. 2 expectations in a test, while not always recommended by unit testing gurus, is sometimes something you want to do, and in Jasmine, it won't just quit on the first one, so you can get more information as you go. So that kind of wraps up our quick introduction to running unit tests with Jasmine. If you're interested in what Jasmine is actually doing to run on the HTML page, which may be interesting to you if you want, say, if you have a single page app and you actually want to have Jasmine run on that page in the context of the app, I'm just going to jump through here a little bit of what the actual Jasmine JavaScript files are doing. So in the spec runner HTML, again, we have Jasmine.js, Jasmine HTML.js, and then boot.js loaded before you actually do your source and your specs. So let's take a look at what each of those is doing. So Jasmine.js is actually mostly getting this Jasmine requires object, something that Jasmine can import all of its stuff through and all of its internal libraries into that namespace. So you can see, the available matchers, the typical things described in the documentation, some of which we've seen, like to be falsy, to equal, to have been called with, that sort of thing. There's not a whole lot else in this file of interest if you just want to get Jasmine running on the page. Again, just getting this Jasmine require object. And you can see that it's not really wrapped in any particular CommonJS or AMD style. It's just typically working with this Jasmine require object and doesn't return or export anything at the end. So once Jasmine.js is included on the page, this get Jasmine require object is on the window, and then Jasmine HTML.js can use that Jasmine require object and it can set some HTML related stuff up, and that's typically just that reporter, which is the visuals for which specs ran, and how the buttons and links for how to rerun various tests. So Jasmine HTML.js is just basically extending the Jasmine require object that's on the window. So then finally, we have the boot.js file. And you can see that it's wrapped in IFI, so it's just a function that's executing immediately, and it's actually setting the Jasmine object on the window. So if you're using, for instance, require.js, you would need to shim Jasmine because it's placing the Jasmine object on the window, so you'd want to export the Jasmine object so that you could require it in from a separate file. And so boot.js is the one that actually sets this Jasmine object. It's relying on the Jasmine require object already to be on the window, as you can see. And it's also, in this case, the boot.js file is one that you can customize to your own use. And in this case, it knows it's an HTML page, so it's expecting Jasmine HTML to have been run and this HTML function to be available and set up. There's not much else going on with this one except the important thing. It's creating the Jasmine HTML reporter. It's adding that reporter here, and then it also has its own API reporter. Setting up filters for the specs, and that's with the URL param spec equals, which we saw earlier. Should be able to play a song, spec equals, player should be able to play a song. And the other thing is overriding or setting up to override the asynchronous parts of JavaScript there, the set timeout and set interval and all that. And then finally, to actually get Jasmine to execute the specs, it is picking up the onload function, if there is one, and replacing it, and then calling the existing one, but initializing the reporter, which is important, and it is calling execute on env, and env is the Jasmine environment. That's kind of the where everything lives in Jasmine, the context of what's currently going on. And I assume that you can run with multiple environments if you so desired, but I've never seen that use case. So if we want to see like where env was created, jasmine.getEnv just gets the currently executing or currently set up environment. So if you wanted to run this on a page of your own, you basically need to just set up the reporter, whether you want to use Jasmine's HTML reporter or your own, and then call env.execute. And that's the key to running the specs on the page. So that was just a quick introduction to Jasmine 2, particularly running on HTML pages, not running from the command line, although that is possible. And then at the end there's some extra information about what Jasmine is actually doing to run specs on a page. So I hope you enjoyed it, and please leave me some feedback if you have questions or need some clarification.